Well, I have 2 o'clock here, my time, 8 a.m., 8 p.m. here. So I will say welcome to Manuscript Monday, or Buonasera, as they say, where we're hanging out. I usually don't run these webinars from Rome, but that's where I am today. My name's Brian Kathenes, and I'm your host. And this evening, we have a wonderful guest with us, Spencer Stuart, and we're going to talk more about him in just a little bit. So I want to welcome you to Manuscript Monday. Again, we're going to talk about contemporary issues and opportunities in rare book and manuscript collecting. Our special guest is Spencer Stuart, who's been with us before, and we're going to talk a little more about what's going on. Let me see if I can move this forward. There we go. So who is the sponsor? Well, it's the Manuscript Society. And as you know, the Manuscript Society is a not-for-profit organization that has been around for many, many years. We're celebrating our 75th anniversary. Why a webinar? It's probably the best way for us to reach out to everybody, the easiest and most efficient way to keep more people involved. Why are we doing a webinar? It's part of one of the benefits of being a Manuscript Society member. And we're also reaching out to folks who aren't members because we want to share information as a not-for-profit educational organization. That's part of our mission. Why now? Hey, why not? Who's invited? Members of a variety of organizations, including some appraisers and archivists and collectors of books and of manuscripts, and folks who are just interested in interesting things out there. What we're going to cover, I'll tell you about that in just a second. How to get more information, we'll cover that as well. If you need help, you can text me at 908-256-6119. That information is right at the bottom of the screen there. I've also sent it to you in a chat. You should be able to hear me now. If you have any questions, give me a text or put a little something in the chat section there. I'll do my best to answer. We're going to hold our questions till the end, but we'll have plenty of time for questions. So you can talk to Spencer and ask Spencer what's going on. You can either do that live, or you can do that by just typing in. We are live. This is a live stream webinar, but it's going to be recorded, and it'll be available online and through our Manuscript Society site. So with that, let's just keep it moving. All right. As Shirley has mentioned in her original write-up, it's a big world out there. And there's so many places to purchase manuscripts and books, and we're going to talk about those. We're going to talk about all those options. And Spencer's going to talk about a little more about in great detail and what's going on in the market and things that are happening too. So here, I'm not going to read this because you can certainly read it. I'll give you a minute to just go through it so you know what we're going to be covering tonight. Spencer's done extensive research. He's going to share that research with us tonight, as well as answering your questions about what's going on in the market, because he's got his hand on it every single day. Here's a little information about Spencer, our guest speaker tonight, and a little bit about me, because I'll be filling in some of the during the little bit of part of the evening. He's certainly an experienced collections advisor. He's been involved in a lot of things. He holds a master's degree in the history of art, and he's been involved in the auction world, as you can see, and been involved with all kinds of things. And we're delighted to have him again. He's truly an expert in the field. Spencer, thanks so much for being with us this evening. Oh, are you still? Is your audio on? Are you good?
Yeah, we're good.
There you go.
Thanks
Excellent.
for having me, Brian.
That's great. It's my pleasure to have you. I'm delighted. What I'm going to do is we're going to turn this over to you now. So I am going to make you the host, and then you can take over the screen, and you should be it should be all yours now when you're ready to go.
Perfect. All right.
There you go. We got you up there. I'm going to turn my camera off and my sound off as well.
Great.
All right.
Well, thank you again for having me, and it's good to be back with the Manuscript Society and giving another talk on some topics that are on my mind and what I'm observing out there. The presentation that I'm touching on tonight, it's dealing with two discussions. One of which I've kind of worked through in some of the writing that I'm doing on changes in the auction market, particularly through the COVID period. and what some of these transformations are doing in terms of the larger auction industry, and how these are really essential to understand if you're a buyer within the auction market, or if you're someone who's considering selling, or even if you're collecting in another context, if you're still dealing predominantly with booksellers or involved in the trade. And then the other portion is just more of a more general discussion about the auction process, and it's something we'll probably spread on into what Brian is discussing this evening. And of course, if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A or the chat, and we'll deal with those at the end of the presentation. Now, something that I've been noticing, particularly through the COVID period, and I've been continuing to keep an eye on to see if it's something that's sustaining itself, is really a transformation of collectors that were, say, specifically focused on acquiring their material through the trade, or were fair-centric collectors, as they say, people who really went to the book fairs or focused on building their collections through catalogs. What I noticed was there was an increase in activity and a migration over to the auction process during the COVID period. And one of the reasons for this was that there was just an increased supply that was coming into the auction market through the COVID period. And this is something that, when it was taking place, when it was starting to take place through 2020, as you can see in the indicator here, this is the period of time in which COVID was announced as a global pandemic. I wondered if this was something that was going to peak out and then it was going to go back to consistent numbers or the traditional numbers from a previous period, or if this was in fact kind of a new normal within the auction market. And certainly it seems as though talking to clients and talking to people within the trade and auctioneers, that there has in fact been a kind of a net new participation in the auction world. And we'll touch on what the nature of that growth is in a second. But stepping back, during the COVID period, it really accelerated a transition that was already underway within the auction world. And I characterize it kind of generally as a shift from a wholesale perspective of the auction world. So we think of context of large estate sales in which you have a sort of a coalescence or a connection, a variety of different books being sold as a single lot, through to more of a retail model. And what we see in this is also a kind of change from a traditional cycle of an estate sale, say, an estate sale auction format, in which a dealer sources material, which is then goes on to be offered to the collector, the private collector, or in some cases the institution. But if we think about it in terms of a late 19th century, early 20th century format, it's very much to the private collector at that point in time. And here I like to think of this as, in the 19th century, you have an image, a representation of Bernard Corrich, who would very much be having a look at the variety of different offerings of an estate sale and thinking about how we could pair those up with a private collector, through to a July 2020 with a kind of robust situation, as you see with Sotheby's and their Rembrandt and Richter sale, and no doubt with the Sassoon Codex there'll be a similar setup in the middle of May with that auction. So what you see with the change of auctions, particularly after World War II, is a change in mentality of the auction house. What you start to see are specialty hires, people who were in some cases from the trade moving into the auction world. You see more target marketing, investment in target marketing, investment in digital platforms, as well as the posting of results of books that have been offered at auction, as well as providing that data to third-party aggregators. So you think of something like ArtPrice or Rare Book Hub. These are fundamental changes in the way the auction house starts to see itself. Not so much a passive situation, but one in which there is an engagement, a more active engagement with connecting with private collectors. Now, coming out of 2021, the format of the auction, from my conversations with private collectors, as well as people working in the auction context, what was being found is that the format was starting to really engage with people more. The posting of prices, the increasing amount of data to make educated decisions of comparables. These sorts of things for a new generation of collectors are something that is really an attractive benefit to engaging in the auction context. And you saw some booksellers, in fact, considering the format. In and around 2021, you saw Donald Heald, who explored that platform. And in his statement about it in Rare Book Hub, he talks about both buyers and sellers are increasingly expressing a preference for market-derived prices. This is, again, connecting to comparables, seeing the past performance of similar materials at auction. And in fact, you saw an increase, in auction activity. Looking at 2021 in particular, we had overall offerings of 521,000 items with a sell-through rate of 81.8%. And that's a 20% increase over the year 2020. So, the question coming out of 2022 and into this year is, will this sustain itself? Is this something that's just coming out of the COVID period, or is it in fact a change in the behavior and engagement with auctions? Not only from the buy side, but also in the way in which auction houses are engaging with people and having them connect. So while the trade was sort of trying to figure out amongst themselves how to kind of participate in an auction format, there was really no going back for a number of collectors. It's continued to be something that they consider as an extra channel for them in building their collections. And so there was sort of there's a further change that's taking place, really fundamentally in the way that people are sourcing their material. So in looking at these numbers, something I ask is, identifying the growth. What was actually happening in this? And so if you look at the number of lots, this overall stayed stable. What was really interesting was the increase in the number of events, auction events themselves, as well as the overall decrease of prices per lot. So the average lot cost that was successfully sold. Now, around this period of time, you also saw an increase of auction houses. However, as you can see in 2012 to 2017 to 2021, you see the majority of the events being held by a few amount of auction houses. And they are really a different scenario altogether. When you look at something like Heritage or Katawiki, Heritage still a kind of brick and mortar with quite an aggressive online presence, and Katawiki, which is a venture capitalist funded operation that is solely hosted through the digital. These are really an interesting group to kind of watch the way in which they're interacting with each other and the way in which they are running their businesses and what they're consigning to keep these houses going. Really, it is a strategy of many lower cost items and increasing the amount of units or lots offered with every auction event. The question then becomes, was this something that took place in 2022? Is this something that will be sustained? We'll keep an eye on it, something that I'm still writing on and looking into. What I can say for 2022 is there was an increase in auction houses. However, there was a continuation of a consolidation of the amount of auction events taking place by a few amount of auction houses. There was an increase in auction events, predominantly by that group, but it was very small. The sell-through rate went down somewhat, as well as the the ultimate result of how many items sold through went down, but a smaller amount. And the lots per event actually increased. So this is something to see in terms of how these models are working out. And in terms of the sort of way the auction industry is going, there's very much a kind of a sort of facing off or a watching behavior of the brick and mortar institutions and online based auctions. So you think of something like Heritage, which does kind of lower price items, high units in an auction event. And then you think of something like Sotheby's or Christie's. They're trying to figure out their own model at the same time that there really is this development of online through something such as Katawiki. And a good way to understand what's taking place in the auction industry is really along the lines of these two models. The option is either high volume of low cost items or a smaller amount of items, but exceedingly rare. That's really the way that this split is taking place. And it will be really interesting to see how venture capitalist backed auction platforms online start to engage with market share of the middle market auction houses, middle market regional auction houses as we go into the century. So this is something to keep an eye on as someone who's purchasing material and sourcing material and building collections, but also someone who is interested in consigning materials with auction houses and thinking about what's the best option forward. So coming out of the situation, especially through the COVID period, you start to see, and this is continuing to happen, you're starting to see brick and mortar, specifically brick and mortar auction houses, starting to try and find new offerings or new approaches to really distinguish themselves in, as you can see, a marketplace where there are more auction houses and really an increase over the last 5 to 7 years. And you see it through something such as Christie's doing kind of new frontier like offerings, like the Birth of Wikipedia sale that they had in December of 21, amongst a bunch of other kind of marquee event type sales where you see few amount of items being offered, but very rare items. You see it in scenarios such as the kind of development of client services. Hindman launching its independent appraisal division in March of 2022 is a good example of this, trying to provide kind of a more holistic approach to engaging with not only buyers but sellers. You see this with other auction houses that have kind of estate divisions in which they kind of try and deal with not only the books within a collection, but also all other matter of items within an estate. And then another really interesting one that is really, there aren't very many examples of this because there's not a lot of room for people participating in this type of strategy, but seeing how Aspiris, this a venture capital firm, has really used Bonhams, which they've acquired, to consolidate a variety of different auction houses internationally, really to try and engage, expand the purview of Bonhams itself. And this is something to keep an eye on, and is something that's very much limited to building up the Bonhams brand for an eventual offering of it. And we'll see where this goes. It seems as though they're continuing to do that, and certainly engaging with Skinner at this point, and the way they are meshing in with Bonhams is interesting to observe, as well as Bukowski's. So something another way in which these auction houses are trying to adjust to some of these changes that are taking place and some of these consolidations that are taking place by larger auction houses that are really trying to increase their auction event as an approach. Now, with regards to something, say, like Katawiki or some of the venture capital online platforms, one of the things they're working on currently is trying to establish more legitimacy as a platform. Something that Brian's going to be touching on is some of the other platforms for auction, eBay, things like this. It's really their effort is going to be to try and separate themselves from that kind of identity and move into something that is a bit more established. And you see that in some of the hires that they've been developing over the last couple of months. Hiring people from established auction houses as experts. You also see this in a lot of the data that they're able to gather from people's activity online in order to reach out and offer material that may connect with collecting interests. But you also see at the end of the day, a lot with these venture capital firms is that there is this advantage of less overhead. And so they will start trying to experiment and try a whole variety of different approaches that may not even resemble some of the more traditional structures of auction event as we know it. So also something to keep an eye on, and something to keep an eye on in terms of that middle market area. If you're someone who's collecting material that is in and around the thousands, in which there's lots of comparables, high frequency of the material appearing at auction, it's definitely something to consider when you're looking around. So when you're participating in the auction, be it as a consigner or someone who's buying material, something that I like to talk about with people is that there's the system of the auction and then there's the event. The system of the auction is something that's very much to consider if you are consigning material and thinking about it if it's beneficial for you or not as an option for deaccessioning your items, or if you're trying to maybe change the focus that you're working on for your collection. And there's advantages and there's aversions to both perspectives. With regards to being a seller, I think the most important thing is about giving yourself time to consider your collection and what's the timing of offering material if you decide to go through auction. One of the benefits of going through the auction, if you are consigning, is the access to broader audience, as well as the urgency of the auction event. So that moment in which it's possible that this is an item that's quite rare, and then you have several bidders, and the possible benefits for someone consigning that material. It's a very real possibility. And also that broadcasting. Again, back to this discussion of the mentality of auction houses, especially in the 90s into the 2000s, investment in digital marketing, but also targeting of potential purchasers. It's something that you can work to your advantage when you're hoping to offer your material. Another thing in this more general discussion of doing your homework is to understand what is the region for the collecting interest that you have. And further to that, is the auction house capable of disseminating information about your offerings in their catalogs, but also in the lead up to the auction event itself? So one of the things I like to do an exercise with people is to look at auction houses as though you're a buyer. So is the auction house forthcoming with its results? This is something I think that's really important when people are bidding, is to have as much information as possible, because it mitigates risk. So look at the catalogs, see how the descriptions are put together. How are they appropriate? Do they align with similar well-researched material on these subjects? Review the results, have a look at what are the estimates that are being provided by this house. Are the results in and around these estimates, or are they undervaluing it? What's their tendency? And then finally, that will culminate in this understanding of, would you buy from them? A really kind of straightforward understanding of, are they a group that would well represent the material that you're offering? You think of this kind of geography thing. One that I'm finding kind of interesting at the moment is if you look on the West Coast, demographically, there are a large amount of beat collections that are being offered. And you really do find it to be kind of a focus along that period, along that area. And it's something that if you kind of look at it, especially in the kind of middle market regional auction houses, you start to see these interesting concentrations or flare-ups of interesting or interest in a particular type of material. Certainly something that I've been seeing recently is material relating to Ukraine and the early print history of Ukrainian culture, which has certainly emerged in the last year. These sorts of things are very much connected to auction marketing and the offering of material and what becomes available if you're trying to build collections. With regards to buying, this is the other side of the dynamic. So everything that we were talking about in terms of creating a sense of urgency or a sort of special sense of the event, of the offering of your material, this is to engage the buyers. And so as a buyer, it is always important when engaging with the auction event to understand that you are taking on all the risk. And so with that in mind, it is important to gather as much information prior to the event as possible. One of the ways to do that, I think this is the most important way to do it, engaging with auctions, is to know your collection, to have a well-cataloged collection and understanding of where you are in your collecting, what your collection is made up of. Are you interested in very specific good examples of subjects that you collect, or are you interested in series? Are you interested in collecting many issues or iterations of a similar thing? What's your approach to your collecting? This should underpin your engagement with the auction, and it should indeed be the reason you are engaging with an auction event. Otherwise, if it's something that you're doing without kind of engaging with the collection alongside you, it becomes something that decouples from it, and you start to engage with the kind of fervor of the moment of the auction event when it may not be necessary. When there might be an item that's being offered, however, there is a high percentage of that item being offered again, that demographically there are collectors in that particular field that will be offering it and consigning it. Certainly there is an increase in consignments overall. So this is something really to consider. There are more options, not less at this point in time. And there's absolutely an increase in auction involvement on the buy side as well as consignment side. So something to always consider when you're engaging. And then from there, from that engagement of, okay, this is where I should be in terms of sourcing material for your collection, it's to now go to work on that item that's being offered. So know that item, understand what are the odds of that item emerging again in other sales, and then also, what is the makeup of its description? How is its condition, its quality? What are the likelihoods of similar items in that kind of quality to be offered? These sorts of things, they come with research, looking at comparables of similar items that have appeared at auction. All this stuff is really crucial to know yourself coming into the auction event so that you don't feel overwhelmed. If you're someone that really does get caught up in the moment, it might be an idea to have someone represent you through making offers during the auction event, or absentee bids, or if it's something where you like to be engaged in that process, certainly by phone, in the room, these sorts of things. It's important to get a sense of yourself in these moments, because they are certainly something that can get quite exciting for people, and you can get really attached to the item that you've been researching and studying, and how it may play into your collection. And of course, in the event itself, the auction event, it is not yet yours as it's being bid on. So important to understand how those dynamics affect you and influence you when you're building your collections. So with that, something that came up with clients who were making this kind of migration over to auction and have continued to consider it as a channel for the building of their collections is this discussion of the transparency of it, that there are more comparables and more available data to make informed decisions about the items that you're interested in acquiring for your collection. And something that is interesting to see is that this is continuing to happen. There's more activity in auction events, and I'll be continuing to publish and monitor these activities. Certainly 2021 was a massive change over 2020. 2022 looks to be stable or similar to 2021 in terms of its nature and where that growth is. And at present, 2023 is tracking to be a similar year. A majority of the activity will happen from September through to December. That's really that is the auction season that people need to be prepared for when offers are available for people. But that will really determine if we are in fact in an entirely different space in terms of the auction's influence on the collecting market. And so, it will be interesting to see, as especially you see online platforms, but also middle market brick and mortar institutions, as they're trying to find their way through the changing changing environment of the auction world. It'll be interesting to see as they start to offer previously difficult areas to collect. So you think of something like ephemera, pamphlets, these sorts of materials. I'm seeing more of those collections, small archive collections, certainly for brick and mortar institutions to make collections, make sales more interesting. They're doing much more personal collector sales, or from the collection of, from the library of. These are all attempts to really establish a kind of very unique quality within a market which is ever expanding and continuing to do so, both in an online context and also in a physical context. Some of the impasses that I'm seeing in this kind of change, in this transition, is that you're seeing mature collectors with holdings as well as market data now. And that's impacting how they're thinking about where they're deaccessioning the material, whether they go through trade or whether they offer it through auction. This is something that's starting to change, starting to see more of a shift of mature collectors working with auction houses and maybe not with the trade. But this is something that's also dynamic and also changing. But overall, it's going to be interesting to see specifically brick and mortar institutions, or rather auction houses, in that middle market as they try and tackle having an individual identity in this marketplace, and also dealing with the overheads that they have to deal with in terms of staff, putting together the catalogs, rent for the space that they're displaying these collections and holding these sales, as well as all the online infrastructure that's absolutely necessary for them to move forward. So it's a dynamic time. There's lots of material that is available, and there's lots of information that can be analyzed to make those decisions. And with that, I'll pass it over to Brian, who will sort of be touching on more of the online components of the auction market. And then we can have a discussion afterwards, addressing any questions people have. But for now, thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to the ensuing conversation.
Great. That sounds great, Spencer. Thank you so much. That's just wonderful. I am going to reclaim my host position here, and
Perfect.
then I am going to share a screen, and we should be good to keep things going here too. So that was great. That's a really valuable information for all of us to know. I appreciate you sharing your insight. I know you've done a lot of research to make that happen. So I'm going to skip past a couple of things here and get us to where we are. So with that, I'm just going to pick up where Spencer left off, but I did want to mention something. A few people asked about Rare Book Hub, and Rare Book Hub is a subscription service that compiles auction data and auction results from across the world and is compiled in one spot. We'll talk a little more about that in just a second, but that was one of the things. There's another organization or another company called WorthPoint that pretty much takes mostly eBay data that is more than 60 days or more than 90 days old. You can go back 10 or 15 years. Again, a subscription service, but it keeps information together. I'm going to take a quick look at the Q&A here to see if something came up that I need to look at. I think we're good right now. Okay, so with that, let's just kind of jump right into this. What I want to do is just give you some other options and let you know that there are some things out there that we may not have that aren't part of the big major auction houses. But first, let's say the following information and the previous information is not an endorsement for any of the sites, companies, or organizations provided or part of this discussion. But we want to put them out there to you so you can do your own research and figure out where you go. And like Spencer mentioned, certainly do your own homework. We talked about the major auction houses, both domestic and international. They're all over the place. They're quickly changing. Again, everybody's jockeying for position to figure out what part of the market they want and how they're going to handle it. And Spencer did an outstanding job of covering that. But there's retail dealers and galleries as well, where you can access books, manuscripts, or anything you might want to collect. There's local and regional general auctions, and these are the local auction houses or the regional auction houses that offer more than books and manuscripts and autographs and the things that we primarily focus on for Manuscript Monday. In addition to that, there are the specialty auction firms that might handle just books or just autographs or just Disney memorabilia or just political memorabilia. So the specialty auction firms are things you should also keep in mind and look for as well. The online auction compiler services, and they may be known by a different name, are services and companies that take everybody's auctions. And if you're a dealer or if you're a collector and you want to list something on this particular auction site, you can do that. And there are a variety of those. I'm going to show you those in just a second. In addition to that, there's an online retail sites, and most dealers have retail sites. And there are also companies where you can list things for sale at a retail price. You may know of those, and I'm going to share some of those with you as well. We just want to give you lots of options. Again, there are antique shops and the vintage co-op shops. Probably, I got to tell you that the last 20 or 30 antique shops I've been to see around the United States, there's not an antique in them, depending upon what your definition of antique is. So vintage and antique and classic are all names for things that might be older, maybe not so old. I've seen a lot of things in there that they call antique that are younger than I am, but that may make me an antique too, but that's certainly okay. Collector organizations and clubs are a great way to find things that you might want to pick up. A lot of the organizations have a section in the back of their magazine or in their website where people can share things they're interested in selling. The American Philatelic Society and the Philatelist, which is their magazine, always has a section in the back. The numismatic magazines have the same. A lot of the collector organizations have places where you can buy or sell or trade. And estate sale and liquidation companies, they have more than just books, certainly a little bit of everything, but they have their own websites and they list things that are coming up for sale and offered as well. Thrift and consignment shops, we've heard about all kinds of great stories where things are found there. So don't overlook those things. And let's just, I'm going to break this down into little individuals. So let's look at auction and retail options for starters. The major auction houses, Spencer covered, the retail dealers and galleries, local and regional auctions, specialty auction firms. That's what we're going to talk about now. Where are you going to find those and how do you reach out to those particular places? One way to do that is just good old search the web. Type in auctions, type in sales, type in an item you're looking for. Under a Google search, you can look under sales and offers. There's a little button for that, and then you'll see all of the ads. You can also check out your publications, including Manuscripts, which has a lot of information about the dealers that are advertising and sponsoring a lot of these events. You're going to find some information about them. Their website, sometimes they have specific offerings in every issue of all our publications, including Manuscripts and our news and other publications. That's the collector organizations I was talking about, and one of them is the Manuscript Society. Ask your collector friends, unless you're looking for the exact same thing, and they're gonna send you somewhere else, so you're not bidding against them or buying something that they're looking for. They'll point you in the right direction. They're going to tell you what they like and what works for them. We're going to share some of those tonight as well. And find the locals. There are local clubs There are local organizations. There's a bunch of folks that may just get together and look at things or run local tours. I know the Manuscript Society has chapters and areas and organizations. Barton Smith was is one of our outstanding members that has always managed to get us together in the Philadelphia area. And after a great tour of a particular museum or a library, we all sit around at his favorite Chinese restaurant and we talk about what we collected, how we collect it. So talk to your locals and find out what's going on there. And it's interesting, I didn't see Spencer's presentation and he hasn't seen mine, but I also wrote down, do your homework, which is really incredibly important. You need to know what's going on. And I'm looking at some of the questions that I'm going to get to in just a little bit. So some of the alternative options for you are the online aggregators or compilers of auction services. So again, I said, if you're a dealer or you're a seller, you can list things for sale on these sites. And I'm going to cover some of those now. You may have heard of BidSquare or eBay, Live Auctioneers, Invaluable, EBTH, which stands for Everything But the House, Max Sold, Auction Zip. And these are all different ones, and there are plenty more out there. Again, read and understand their terms of sale. The guarantee sometimes comes through the person who's listing them. A lot of times these auction aggregators and compiler services don't have any, or not to claim any responsibility for things being authentic or having clear title. And these days, clear title seems to be as important or maybe more important than the authenticity of a piece. So understand what the terms are in any of these kind of things. What I've done here is put together just a couple of examples to let you see some of what these pages look like. And again, this is Everything But the House. And in the very top here, you can see I just searched for Disney, and that's all I put in there. And the first three things that came up at the time, these are auctions that are still going. I think there were 7 items that I see that were available. I'm looking for where I saw that, somewhere along the line here. And usually tell you here are 6 items right here were searched for Disney. So there was a Star Wars piece here, and there's a Disney poster, and there was an online. That's Everything But the House. This is used primarily from auction estate liquidators, tag sale people that are not only listing them in one particular place, but they listed here online. The way these usually work on the big auction houses, the big estate sale people is, and a lot of the auction houses now used to pick up all your stuff, they threw it in a truck and they dragged it off to their auction gallery. There was shipping costs, there were labor costs, there was insurance costs. Now what a lot of these folks are doing for the estate sales is they're leaving them in place right at the home. They take all the pictures, they write the descriptions up, they put them up for sale, and they say on May 27th, you can come and pick up your items. Lots 1 through 30, you pick them up between 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock. 31 through 50, you pick them up from 11 to 12. We'll have security staff there and sometimes people to help you move things. So the whole idea, as Spencer has mentioned, is how the whole auction world is changing. And I want to look more beyond books and manuscripts to everything that's being sold via auction or through direct sale and what's going on. And the first big thing was to have online auctions. The next big thing now is to leave them in place so you don't have all those shipping costs. This is Everything But the House, as I mentioned, and that was one example. Another one is Live Auctioneers, and this is very popular. I just typed in Charles Darwin Origin, and you can look at upcoming sales or you can see prices realized, and that's similar. You'll be able to get things similar to what you've seen on Rare Book Hub, but Live Auctioneers is for just about everything. So I typed in Charles Darwin Origin, which might be Origin of Species or things along those lines, a title that would have that in it or something related to origin. And 4 results came up. One is listed for currently at 1,000. Here's another one, a bunch of books listed at 100 Appletons, which probably really isn't anything related to Darwin. And here's 66 works in the middle. One of them must have been a Darwin book somewhere along the way or had the word Darwin, Origin, or Charles in it. And there were 6 there too. Again, there's a prices realized section. I'm kind of showing you that with my cursor right there too. And you can click on that to find out what they've sold, which is also another great way to help you do research. Another one is invaluable. And for invaluable, all I typed in was Andy Warhol signed. And again, we don't know if these are authentically signed by Andy Warhol or somebody had a felt-tip marker and went crazy to see what they could create. Again, do your homework, read all the descriptions. Does it come with a certificate of authenticity or a letter of authentication or anything along those lines, or are you on your own? But again, there's Andy Warhol. A lot of them came up, and here's all the categories on the left side related somehow to Andy Warhol. There were 167 items that popped up with the search Andy Warhol signed. Okay, let's look at another one and see what else I put up here for you. Auction Zip's another one. In Auction Zip, I just typed in autograph, and I got 2,936 results. And this is something that's this particular screenshot was of of auctions that are currently going on. I did this last week or the week before when I put the presentation together. But I'm just showing you the first page so you can get an idea of what's there. Again, that's Auction Zip. And there's plenty others out there as well. We all know eBay. eBay started primarily as a site for collectors of Pez programs, and it's grown to be an amazing source. As appraisers in the beginning of its early days, we never considered this a reliable source or a reliable market, but eBay is a market that needs to be considered. Again, check the terms, find out about certificates of authenticity, find out about genuineness and clear title. I just typed in George Washington autograph letter, came up with a bunch of items. There were 18 results. I got a George Washington, as in the President of the United States, and I got a George Washington Carver as well. And there are others in there too. That'll give you information. You can also look underneath, and we've talked about this in previous Manuscript Mondays when we talked about how appraisers determine value. One of them is to look over here, and then you can click on this and look under completed sales, so you can see what actually sold as opposed to what's being offered. And most of the auction houses now, you can go in and you can search results as opposed to just looking at what's coming up for sale. And that's an important thing too. Some retail outlets, you got the online retail stores. Almost all the dealers and galleries have a web presence in one form or another. Again, we talked about antique shops and vintage co-op shops. A lot of those have websites too, but they may just highlight a couple of things that might be out there too, all right? The other one is collector organizations and clubs, which we talked about. Estate sale liquidation companies. Again, they will take a lot of their information and put them on everything but the house, or they might add them somewhere else as well. Thrift shops and consignment shops we talked about. I won't go on to that again. And to compile the retail offering services, you have and these are retail offerings. These aren't sales. Excuse me. A-Books, Etsy, First Dibs, Via Libre, and there are others out there too. Etsy is a retail site, and you can see if I just typed in books, you get a whole series of 3,228,000 results for books. You can narrow your search down, which I would suggest you do, but you'll see here are 5 vintage books or 2,000 books. There's 500 books. So they'll sell them as lots. They'll sell them in individual groups. Again, that's Etsy, and you'll see retail ads for that too. Sometimes on regular TV and cable where people are selling things on Etsy. Abe Books is an antiquarian book exchange, and they are listings of literally millions of books that are being offered by dealers. And you'll see this. I just typed in, what did I type in here? Old Man Hemingway, I think I typed in. Oh, here it is. I typed in Hemingway, and I typed in Old Man, and I got 162 results. Again, these are retail offers. Read the description. This one happens to be claimed to be a first edition and claimed to be signed by Hemingway. And there are others in there. A-Books is another place to look for manuscripts and books, primarily books, but you'll see some manuscripts and some art there as well. The other one is First Dibs. I typed in mid-century modern desk, and I got 77 results, I believe. I don't know where they are exactly, but there's some mid-century modern desks. I'm not a big century modern fan because I grew up with it and I always thought it was old furniture. but it's doing very well, extremely well in the auction world and in the sale of that particular type of furniture. But I wanted you to see First Dibs. Again, that's a retail site primarily. Via Libri is similar to A Books, but it compiles the other compilers. So if you look here, I typed in Mark Twain or Samuel Clemens or something along like that. This book came up on Huck Finn, and you can see it was offered in A Books, it was offered at Alibris, and it was offered at Antique Book. These dealers will list these in a variety of places. Again, down below, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 listings of this book. So you can find them in a variety of places. This I use this one along with some of the others as well, because it seems to compile more and I can get a little bigger overview of what's going on in the world. So I wanted to just kind of leave it at that and say it is a big world out there. There are many places you can purchase manuscripts and books. We talked about brick and mortar locations, online, auctions, independent dealers, virtual live trade shows. There are endless options. And it sounds like Spencer has identified there's just going to be more along the way. Again, the preceding information and all the information is not an endorsement for any of the sites, the companies, or organizations that we talked about tonight. So do your homework. And with that, I got a couple things for you, and then we're going to go right to Q&A. We'll open the mic to Spencer. I'll read your questions. There are about 8 or 9 of them up there right now. And feel free to type something in as well, or raise your hand, and I'll see if I can do that. Spencer's back on. And want to let you know, California, here we come. May 16th to 20th, the Manuscript Society has our annual meeting and conference out in Los Angeles. If you can get there, get there. It's an incredible conference. They are always great. If you ever want to go behind the door that says staff only or no admittance, you got to go to this conference, because we're going to be backstage and behind the scenes at libraries and museums and get some incredible tours. And it's a ton of fun. The people are great. You're going to have a good time. Go to manuscript.org and you can find out about that. That's the Manuscript Society commercial. Again, right at the end of this, probably within 15 minutes of ending this, you're going to get an email from me, which will come through Zoom. Check your spam folders too. That's going to say, thanks for joining us. Thanks for watching. This letter will serve as your certificate of attendance. You can get 1 hour of professional development credit. I can't send them again. Once they're out, they're out. So look for them and it'll serve as your certificate. If you're watching live, now if you're watching it later on, you won't get a certificate and you won't get a letter from me saying thanks for joining. You'll be able to watch this webinar anytime. Give me about 2 weeks to get it up on our YouTube channel. And you can find the link at manuscript.org if you can't find it. I want to thank our board, our trustees, and the staff of the Manuscript Society. Special thanks to Spencer Stuart for putting together a great program, and for you for being part of the program. More programs are on the way. If you have a topic you'd like to see or a topic you'd like to present, let me know. I'd be happy to see if we can get that involved. If you want to be an underwriter, give me a call. I'll tell you how to do that. All right. If you're not a Manuscript Society member, go to manuscript.org. If you need more information, that's my email. Feel free to email me and I'll be happy to provide you with any information. So with that, I'm going to go to questions. Spencer, is your mic on?
Yep.
You're back with us. Okay. So I'm going to start running down the list here. Sylvia asked, are retail dealers on the decline, given that auction houses are going more toward retail rather than wholesale? What do you think, Spencer?
I'm not getting the sense that specifically booksellers, antiquarian booksellers, there is certainly a large portion of the demographic that's at a point where they are maybe retiring or passing on their inventories to catalogers that were involved in the organization, or are selling their materials through other booksellers. You see this in the phenomenon of, say, a catalog that's jointly published by a couple of booksellers that makes mention of a collector, usually a private collector who was also a bookseller. You see that happening, or you see some consolidation of the inventory of a bookseller into another group. And in most cases, you see that becoming a net new collection, subject collection for that bookseller. So it might not actually be something that they focus on primarily in their work. So an example would be, say, you're a bookseller that focuses on sort of counterculture material and first editions. And then there's a bookseller that has, predominantly children's books, but, good quality collectible children's books. That might be something that comes into their collection. What the arrangement is in terms of compensation, that I haven't had any conversations with booksellers about. I suspect it might be on a consignment basis, something like this. But you're certainly seeing some of that movement happening right now.
Good. I'm also seeing that a lot of the retail dealers are creating their own auction sites and having auctions of their own material.
Yeah, and that's happening. That's happening predominantly in areas where they maybe had inventory, which at some point in time they acquired, maybe prior to the advent of the internet, or before we really kicked off into the second wave of the internet. As you can see, with sort of Via Libre being that real revolutionary change of consolidating retail prices of a book. So that's a situation which as a bookseller, you may have been purchasing material based on a limited amount of information, and then you started to realize, this was the actual frequency of those titles appearing at market, and that's certainly adjusting pricing. So it's at a point where you can't even really, afford to handle the material. You just need to then offer it to people. To put into collections, right? So that's something that is, I think, a big challenge for booksellers. There's an article I wrote a couple months ago connecting with an annual report of the only publicly listed antiquarian bookseller in the UK. And so if anyone's interested in a copy of that, it breaks down some of the challenges that are ahead for some booksellers that have large amounts of inventory where they haven't adjusted the prices based on auction as well as other trade practice. One of the things. Okay.
Go ahead. All right, I got about 9 more questions to get in. Okay. So I know you could go on for hours, and we'd listen to you for hours, but I want to go to bed. No, I'm kidding. Okay. So did that help? Anything else you want to just wrap that up with Sylvia's question, or we got it covered, you think?
I think that there are going to need to be some certain changes in pricing of inventory within the trade, but that there are some healthy signs of booksellers that are offering material of brand new collecting practices. And I think that's the way you're going to see a lot of change and stability in the trade moving forward. A lot of the real standard collecting areas are going to be represented, I think, more frequently at auction. The processing of it, there's more comparables there. Booksellers are going to be dealing with more and more rare material if they can find strategies to source it. So that's all right.
Good deal. All right. Roger S. is a relatively new manuscript collector focused on papers. I write on Colonial America. I have bought nearly all my items from internet auctions, including eBay, since they send me their auction catalogs email with listed items. How would one find out the listing of items by a non-auction vendor? Boy, Roger, every appraiser on the planet asks that question, because not only do we have to double check, or anybody that's buying or selling wants to double check to make sure that the sales that are reported were actually sold and they're accurate. It's tough, and you really need to pick up the phone and reach out and find out if the dealers that you're working with or dealers that you know of are willing to share that information. A lot of the galleries are not, and they choose to keep that private. And that's certainly their option. Spencer, short reply to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's spot on.
Great.
I think one of the things that maybe very often a lot of these groups have alert systems, ways in which you can do kind of keyword searches for things. So that might be something too.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of times they'll say that it's sold, but they won't tell you what it's sold for. And that's certainly their prerogative. You may want to keep that quiet between their client or their customer and themselves. So Roger, I hope that helps a little bit. David Lowenhurst, my friend David Lowenhurst, I've known for a gazillion years. a respected dealer out there. He said, most of the guests, I suspect, are collectors of autographs and manuscripts. And I believe firms like Katawiki, Bonhams, Hinman are not really players. He puts that in quote. Even major auction houses such as Christie's and Sotheby's have seen their influence in our specific field greatly reduced. I wonder whether auction houses such as R&R, University Archives, etc., who specialize in autographs and have monthly sales, were consulted in trying to identify current trends. So I'm going to ask you for kind of a short answer on that, Spencer, because you're the one who did the research and presented that. And David, I see your follow-up question. Or your follow-up comment. I'll certainly share that along as well. All right, Spencer.
Yeah, both R&R and University Archives are included in Rare Book Hub's data. So that would have been factored into some of the graphs that I was showing you, some of the trends and behavior.
Got it. Good deal. And David, I'm sure you're going to pick up that conversation offline with Spencer over a beer somewhere. Just like choosing a dealer, David says, it's important to know the reputation and experience of the auction experts. Letters of authenticities or COAs are absolutely meaningless unless issued by qualified people. There are plenty of auctioneers and dealers who will issue such certificates and do not know what they're doing. I would never recommend buying on eBay unless the buyer is very knowledgeable. Thank you, David. I appreciate that. I think that's good advice. Kathleen says to me, hi, ABE is Advanced Book Exchange, not Antiquarian Book Exchange. Thank you, Kathleen, for that. I appreciate that and for setting me straight on that. Katrina says, what does it mean when a book says, open quotes, from original copyright edition, question mark, on the cover, and there's no copyright date? Okay, go ahead, Spencer, you take that one. From original copyright edition. Go ahead.
I haven't come across it. I'd have to see the example of what it is and what that may pertain to.
From the original copyright edition sometimes would imply to me that it's probably not an original. But you'll also find first editions that are bound first editions, and it's truly a first edition, but there's several copyrights on the page. That means it may have been published in a magazine prior to that. So it could be a first edition book, even though it has several copyrights on it. But that's something else that you should, Katrina, probably reach out to Spencer or another book specialist to be able to help you figure out what's what. One of the things you could do is you can go to ABE Books and you can look at some of the descriptions that are put together by dealers that are respected dealers or retail catalogs and find out how they're described. You may be able to figure that out. I've learned a lot just by reading catalog descriptions. Cheryl Thurber asks, could you explain further the auction process and costs for sellers in the middle range of $5,000 to $70,000 for the auction process and the costs? That's a big range, Cheryl. Unless you left the zero out and you're talking about between 50 and 70. That may be beyond the scope of us to be able to answer in a short period of time, but there are consignment fees, there are buyer's premiums. So the consignor pays a fee and the buyer pays a fee, and the auction house gets what's kind of in between there. Sometimes it's in the 60, the net is probably 60 to 70% of what the buyer pays. Spencer, you want to comment on that just a little bit?
Yeah, I'd say that's consistent. And it does depend, if you're on the seller side, these can be negotiations with the auction house. The buyer's premium is typically fixed, and they'll publish that in their conditions of sale through the auction house. So the increments sometimes fluctuate from one auction house to the other, but in all cases, with the established auction houses, there'll be a condition of sale. You can click on that, and it'll provide information based on the denominations that you're talking about. I think, I'm just thinking about 5,000.
That's great. That's good. Great. That's a good question. Paul says, excellent info, gentlemen, and then adds to Brian's list of retail options for books. I'd suggest Biblio, which will show up on the sites like Via Libre. And yet we did see that one example. He said Biblio is independent, and this is his comment, as opposed to ABE, owned by Amazon, and is a nice, suitable site. So again, we're not editing any of this. We're just kind of sending information out. Bill asks, would auctions be cheaper for buying items than dealers, or vice versa? And would one generally expect to sell for more money through an auction or from a dealer offer. And that could be we could spend a whole manuscript money on that one, couldn't we, Spencer?
Yeah, that's back to that time and timing. As a seller, you're wanting to try and get the best result, and that can be based on the timing of the material you're offering, combined with the infrastructure of that auction house to reach as many possible buyers as possible. And that may not be necessarily book and manuscript collectors. It may be adjacent fields of collecting, and that's
Right.
something that auction houses are always looking to do. So it would depend on the particular items that you're talking about, but there can be scenarios for both.
Yeah, it works both ways. Certainly, the dealers will tell you that offering something for them, selling something is sometimes new to the market, and they may have a specific collector for that particular item. So you may be best to consign or to sell to a dealer directly, because that dealer has a specialty market with a special number of collectors that are looking for that particular piece. Whereas at auction, you will find, as when I was a full-time dealer for many years, I bought many things at auction and paid the buyer's premium on top of the hammer price, and was able to sell it to a particular collector or a group of collectors because they either didn't buy it at auction, or it was a specialty piece, or I discovered something about it through the research that had been missed in the auction, that maybe it was an exceptionally rare letter. So it works both ways, Bill. As Spencer said, I have another someone who just asked, is it okay or appropriate to approach multiple dealers and auction houses simultaneously about selling your items in order to explore options? Or should a seller work with each party one at a time? Hey, and this was done by an anonymous attendee. It's your money, it's your stuff, and you should do what you think best to be able to get the most for it or put it in the right place. So I think that you should reach out to a variety of auction houses, reach out to dealers, find out what their terms are, find out what they can do for you, find out where you can negotiate. Spencer, think to add to that?
I would add that I'd probably advise to work to have a list and work through the highest probability based on the way that they're performing as a dealer or as an auction house. So to rate that list of people, top prospects and then mid prospects onward. And I would go through it individually to not over complicate the situation. But certainly if you decided to work simultaneously with a couple of groups, to not engage in any contracts or agreements while you're in that process, but to analyze all the data and not commit to anything before that.
Good point. Absolutely. Great. And Barton says, do you want to mention PADA, which is a Professional Autograph Dealers Association? You'll find information on them in Manuscripts. And I didn't mention organizations by name outside of the Manuscript Society. You'll find information about PADA and their members right in Manuscripts and some of our other publications as well. That covers our questions. Spencer, any last minute or two to wrap up, or thoughts?
I'd add, Paul here's added an additional thing, which I think is an important point to bring up.
Oh, there it is. Thank you.
And you're mentioning, it came to mind in terms of the Old Man and the Sea and offerings through A books, is you do, again, this is back to doing your homework. You will see booksellers who are connected with ABAA or any other organization that has a code of ethics where they have a strong descriptions of the books that they're offering. And then sometimes you will see items that are offered in and around the same amount, but with less description. Always be careful about that. And always ask more questions if something seems to be too good to be true. But certainly a good point here, his statement here as a bookseller. I agree that the sites like Via Libri are very important for market research, but both buyers and sellers need to be aware of the huge proliferation of online bookjackers, booksellers who simply copy other dealers' information, up the price, and list it as their own. It's something that to be aware of, certainly in these sort of third-party or aggregate sites. And
right,
so,
yeah. So in essence, the person who's listed the book does not own that book, and ethically and maybe in many ways legally, you can't sell a book that you don't own. But that happens. That happens many times. I've been up against it many years ago when I was buying and selling. And as an appraiser, we look for that too. And as a collector or a seller or a researcher, that's something important. Thank you, Paul, for adding that comment. And I missed it. I just didn't scroll down far enough with that in mind. So with that, we're going to call it quits. Thanks for joining us. We ran a couple of minutes over, but the questions were great and didn't want to leave everybody out. We will catch you. Thank you, Spencer.
Thanks again, Brian.
I hope to catch you again soon. Everybody have a pleasant evening, and we will catch you next month right here on Manuscript Monday. Good night, all.